the Government of Canada, following a dollar-for-dollar approach.
Canada is retaliating against the U.S. against more than $60 billion worth of U.S. goods in total.
We have been abused really for a long time, and we will be abused no longer.
Trump's massive tariffs just backfired in the worst way possible, thanks to Canada. And you can't believe that the U.S. market took a $30 billion hit, all because Trump underestimated Canada's strength. And now, Canada's bold countermove has completely flipped the script on America.
This includes steel products worth $12.6 billion and aluminum products worth $3 billion, as well as additional imported U.S. goods worth $14.2 billion for a total of $29.8.
Canada's response to Trump's trade war was a masterclass in tactical retaliation. Let's start with the basics. $60 billion in tariffs from Canada. Meanwhile, the U.S. market, it lost $30 billion in value faster than you can say trade deficit. This was a full-blown economic brawl with global consequences.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
And yet, this all started as a self-proclaimed genius move from Trump. His administration's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports were sold to the American people as a patriotic crusade to save domestic industries. Make America great again, in action, right? Wrong. Instead of a renaissance in American manufacturing, we got skyrocketing prices, disrupted supply chains, and a steady drip of companies quietly moving production offshore. So much for bringing jobs back home.
President Trump decided to have an unprovoked attack on our country, on families, on jobs, and it's unacceptable.
For Canada, the tariffs felt like an unprovoked attack. Decades of trade agreements, mutual trust, and friendly hockey rivalries seemed to mean nothing.
Counter tariffs, these dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs worth $29.8 billion of U.S. goods, is in addition to $30 billion the federal government previously announced targeting other American.
But Canada didn't take the trade war lightly. The Canadian government's response include a calculated $60 billion in retaliatory tariffs targeting not just any U.S. goods, but politically sensitive ones.
They target American steel and aluminum products specifically, and also some other products that weren't on Canada's list before, including computers, sporting equipment, and also cast iron products.
Let's talk about these Canadian tariffs. The retaliatory tariffs are not confined to just hit steel and aluminum. They extended to everyday goods like sporting equipment and computers. In other words, items Americans actually care about.
Canadian officials have said over and over, if the U.S. imposes tariffs on steel and aluminum, Canada would respond.
Speaking of messaging, Canada didn't just slap tariffs and walk away. Canadian officials took to every platform available, from press conferences to international meetings, to spell out the consequences of the U.S.'s actions.
Now, federal ministers who made this announcement this morning in Ottawa noted that they don't want to do this because this will increase costs for Canadians who buy these U.S. goods, but they say they're left with no other choice but to defend these key Canadian industries.
Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc called out the tariffs for what they were, a move that weakened North America's economic security and risked destabilizing critical industries. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, meanwhile, practically begged Americans to talk some sense into their elected officials. Help us end these tariffs, she urged.
American consumers, I think that's the thing that needs to be reiterated here, is that ultimately American consumers will bear the costs of these tariffs.
But let's not pretend the fallout was one-sided. The U.S. markets were in free fall, shedding $30 billion in value as investors panicked. Manufacturing firms, especially those reliant on Canadian materials, were suddenly staring down the barrel of higher costs and shrinking profit margins.
April 2nd is going to be a very big day for the United States of America. The United States of America is going to take back a lot of what was stolen from it by other countries and by, frankly, incompetent U.S. leadership.
And yet, Trump doubled down. America will take back wealth stolen by other countries, he proclaimed. ignoring the irony that his tariffs were stealing wealth from American consumers in the form of higher prices.
Very difficult to deal with, the Canadian representatives. Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%. Nobody ever talks about that.
When challenged about the damage to U.S.-Canada relations, his response was peak Trump: deflect, deny, and throw in some dubious math about dairy tariffs. 250, maybe 400%, he exclaimed, conveniently forgetting that those numbers represented hypothetical maximums in Canada's quota system, not reality. But hey, who needs facts when you have sound bites?
25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports.
So what's Canada's retaliation plan actually is? Well, it was a calculated $60 billion masterstroke that hit the U.S. where it hurt the most. To understand the sheer precision of this move, let's break it down. Canada's counter tariffs included $30 billion in earlier measures and an additional $29.8 billion in new tariffs targeting an array of American goods.
This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods as of Tuesday, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 21 days' time.
Justin Trudeau's handling of the crisis deserves a mention. Far from reacting impulsively, the Canadian Prime Minister maintained a calm but firm demeanor throughout. His dollar-for-dollar approach was a stance on sovereignty and fairness.
By imposing tariffs, the U.S. will be taxing its own citizens, raising costs for its own business, and fueling inflation.
The irony of these tariffs was palpable. The administration's narrative of protecting American workers and industries was overshadowed by the reality of higher costs for American families. The very policies designed to make America great again were instead eroding the purchasing power of the average household.
More tariffs on the EU, will you respond to their retaliation?
Of course I'm going to respond.
And the world noticed. The European Union retaliated against the U.S. with $40 billion in tariffs of their own, targeting everything from bourbon to motorcycles. Suddenly, Trump was dealing with Canada's countermeasures, along with a global backlash. Canada's deft diplomacy turned a bilateral skirmish into a multinational resistance.
250% for dairy products, tariff. So where do you hear that? You don't hear that. They have a tremendously high tariff, give you the exact numbers in a little while coming out, on lumber.
Trump's trade war was supposed to be a strategic masterstroke, but instead, it looked more like a comedy of errors. One of the most glaring missteps was his fixation on Canada's dairy tariffs. Trump loudly proclaimed that Canada imposed tariffs of up to 270%, sometimes even inflating the figure to 400 baht on U.S. dairy products. These numbers made headlines, but they were about as reliable as a late-night infomercial. Here's the reality. Canada operates under a supply management system designed to protect its farmers by controlling production and stabilizing prices. Yes, certain tariffs exist to prevent market flooding, but the 70% figure applies only to overquota imports, not regular trade.
So we're going to move forward and have a very good conversation with Secretary Lutnick and the whole trade team, as he said, and hopefully we can move this forward because it doesn't benefit anyone.
Breaking this trust had consequences far beyond the trade war. Canada, once one of the U.S.'s most reliable allies, began to question its partnership. And it wasn't just Canada. Countries around the world watched as the U.S. turned its back on its closest neighbor, raising doubts about America's reliability as a trade partner and global leader.
To our American friends, I want you to remember this. Canada is your best friend, best neighbor, and best ally.
Now, over in the U.S., things weren't looking so rosy. The people feeling the squeeze the hardest? Farmers and manufacturers. Canada's counter tariffs didn't just target any old products, they zeroed in on industries tied to Trump's base. Swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Take the dairy farmers in Wisconsin, for instance. already struggling with oversupply issues, they suddenly found themselves caught in a no man's land of trade disputes. Canada's tariffs on U.S. dairy exports, combined with retaliatory tariffs from other countries, turned a bad situation into a crisis. And let's not forget about manufacturers, who were grappling with higher costs for raw materials like steel and aluminum.
President Trump's tariffs against you are causing that. And there are no winners in a trade war.
And the political implications? They were deliciously messy. Trump's tariffs became a hot-button issue in upcoming elections, with Democrats pointing out the economic pain they caused and Republicans scrambling to defend the president's strategy. Meanwhile, up north, Trudeau and his cabinet were reaping the benefits of their steady-handed approach. On the global stage, Canada came out looking like the sensible neighbor dealing with an unhinged roommate. It became a battle for credibility, and Canada was winning. So, what did we learn from this whirlwind of economic chaos and political theatrics? If nothing else, it's that tariffs are like boomerangs. They almost always come back to whack you in the face. Trump's big pitch was that tariffs would protect American industries. The reality? They often hurt the very people they're meant to save. Sure, slapping a 25% tariff on imported steel sounds tough, but when American manufacturers rely on that same steel to make products, the cost spikes across the board. And who ends up paying? You guessed it, the consumer. Modern supply chains are a tangled web of interdependence, and tariffs are like tossing a wrench into the gears. Trump weakened the U.S.'s reputation as a reliable partner by undermining decades of cooperation. Meanwhile, Canada's measured, strategic response highlighted the benefits of playing nice with your neighbors. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to get more updates on the U.S.-Canada trade relationship.